Hello, Bay Ridge. Welcome to another edition of After Hours. This week, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this idea of our no limits culture. On Sunday, we were looking at what I called no limits with KNOW, that we need to understand, recognize, and live within the limits that God has given. But I was doing that kind of riffing off or playing off the idea that's very popular in our culture, that there are no limits, no rules. And in fact, this has reached a crisis point in our culture right now. I mentioned the underlying idea in this philosophy was a radical sense of autonomy, that we don't recognize any authority, we don't recognize any rules, therefore we recognize no limits. And we're even doing this in ways now in our culture that people even 20 or 30 years ago could not have even understood our language. They don't even know what it is that we are talking about. A couple of articles that popped up just in my news feed on my phone this week, these were very popular articles in our culture this week, point to this. The first one was written by a woman who is explaining how she is livid regarding some of the new laws that are being passed regarding abortion. The whole article was a rant regarding anyone who would attempt to say that they could, her right to do whatever she wanted with her own body could be restricted in any way, as if the issue is her body rather than the body of the unborn child. But that wasn't even really what struck me so much. Of course, abortion is a huge issue, and underlying it is this no limits philosophy that no one can tell me what to do with my body, which is actually not true for any of us on a whole host of issues. But she used a phrase in the article that really struck me. I actually read it to Linda as soon as I saw it. And she was speaking and saying that everyone who is doing this is attempting to control any uterus-having human, not just herself, but any other uterus-having human. Now, what she means by this is a woman, but she can't use that phrase because, of course, she's part of our no limits culture, which means that if a person who's born with a uterus wants to call themselves a man now, one cannot refer to them as a woman. So we get the non-grammatical, nonsensical phrase, a uterus-having human, that gets brought out. And this is because our culture has lost any anchor to what is actual reality in our bodies. And if you would doubt what I'm saying with that, there was another article. This one was done by NBC News. And the title of the article was, "Trans Dads Tell Doctors You Can Be a Man and Have a Baby." Trans dads tell doctors you can be a man and have a baby. And the lead couple in this article were a person who was born a woman that now proclaims herself to be a man, and the spouse who was born a man but now proclaims himself to be a woman, and they wanted to have a child. So the person that was born a man but now proclaims himself to be a woman still had male anatomy and therefore impregnated the person who was born a woman but proclaims himself to be a man, because that person, even though they declare themselves to be a man, is still a uterus-having human. And so they became pregnant, and the whole article went off of that. It even further mentioned that there were some people who were upset because a person who declared themselves to be a man went into the emergency room. They had problems, and the doctors did not discern that the person proclaiming they were a man was pregnant, and the person later miscarried and lost the child, and they were blaming the doctors for not realizing this. But of course, they had told the doctors that they were a man. There's nothing else to say besides people who are proclaiming this, and a culture that embraces this has lost its mind. The scripture is very, very clear about how God has made us, and one would think that something as basic as our sexuality, which is literally encoded in every gene in our body that tells us who we are, would be a limit that would be recognized, but not in our culture. Now, let me briefly say, how do we respond to this as believers? Number one, we have to continue to understand life, to recognize limits, and live as God has intended. We have to understand that our culture is saying any sense of law, any sense of boundaries, any sense of limits are a radical restriction on our freedom. But James 1:25 tells us that no, we need to look intently into God's law, the perfect law that gives liberty. It gives freedom. Freedom is found in God's creation, in the way God has made us, within the limits and the law of God, not by trying to transgress those things. So we cannot give in to these deadly ideas that are going on in our culture. We cannot embrace what they're saying, no matter how much we care for the people or love them. We cannot give in to that. Now, that does not mean that we're not kind towards the people. It does not mean that we try to get out there and just fight and be nasty. No, we don't do all this. We are kind to people, but we're not deceived, and we don't go along with this foolishness. The emperor has no clothes. And at the end of the day, we simply have to say, there's no clothes there. This is naked. This is devoid of any sense of reason. But the second thing we really need to do is we need to turn to prayer. Too often Christians are trying to turn to politics as if the change that's going to be brought about can be brought about by law. But that's not really the solution. The law cannot change the heart of man. So we need to pray. First, we need to pray for the individuals. The people in these articles, both of them, my heart goes out to them because they are utterly confused and lost. They need serious help. The ones with the man who's trying to be pregnant and have a baby, it's actually one, they need serious psychiatric help. This is being forced upon children today. That's nothing less than child abuse when someone is doing this. We need to pray for them. We need to ask God to open their eyes and change their heart, because they are walking in a level of deception that the only thing that can set them free from that is the Spirit of God and the gospel of Christ. Secondly, we need to pray for our culture. Our culture cannot survive on this current trajectory. One cannot jump off of a building and proclaim that gravity does not exist. It actually does exist, and the concrete's a-coming. Well, the same thing is true with all of these. One cannot ignore God's limits and proclaim that that is freedom. The concrete's a-coming, and it will come for our culture unless God has mercy. But God is a God who can have mercy. Pray and ask Him to arrest and turn us from this current course and to bring us back into a sense of reality of who God is, who we are, and the way the universe has been made. Because when we accept that rather than rejecting it, we don't find restriction, we find liberty, freedom, joy, and fulfillment. I hope this is helpful to you. I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to gathering for worship again this week. God bless.